On the morning after Christmas, 115 yachts left Sydney Harbor. The water was bright. The crowd was cheering. For many crews, this was the race they had spent years preparing for. Less than 2 days later, the same race would become a rescue operation. The Sydney to Hobart Yacht Race is not a casual holiday sail. It is one of the great offshore races in the world, about 630 nautical miles from Sydney, down the coast of New South Wales, across the waters near Bass Strait, and finally into Hobart, Tasmania. Every year, it begins on Boxing Day. In Australia, that start is part sporting event, part national ritual. People gather around the harbor. News cameras follow the big boats. Helicopters circle overhead. Families watch from the shoreline as the fleet pushes toward open water. From a distance, it can look almost festive. White sails, summer light, the famous harbor, the long line of boats moving toward the heads. But the Sydney to Hobart has never been gentle. The race may begin in warm weather, but the route does not care what season it is. Once the boats leave Sydney, they are committed to a long offshore passage down a coast where weather can change fast. Then comes the part many sailors respect most, the waters near Bass Strait. Bass Strait separates mainland Australia from Tasmania. It is shallow compared with the deep ocean around it, and that matters. When strong weather moves through, the sea can become short, steep, and confused. The waves do not always arrive cleanly from one direction. A yacht can climb one wall of water, drop into the trough, and meet the next wave at an angle that feels wrong before anyone has time to react. That is why the race has a reputation. It is beautiful at the start. It is brutal when the weather turns. In 1998, the fleet looked enormous. 115 yachts crossed the start. Only 44 would reach Hobart. At first, nothing about the day looked like a disaster. Sydney Harbor was alive with spectators. The sun was out. The boats crowded the start line and then began the long run south. Some were elite racing machines, built for speed and crewed by professionals. Others were smaller yachts, prepared by sailors who had spent months working toward this one race. That mixture is part of what makes offshore racing complicated. On paper, all of them are in the same event. At sea, they are not all facing the same race. A large, fast yacht can cover miles quickly, carry more crew, and sometimes outrun weather. A smaller boat may be tougher than it looks, but it moves differently. It may reach the worst part of a system later, when the sea has had more time to build. Two boats can leave the same harbor on the same afternoon and meet very different versions of the same storm. The crews knew the Sydney to Hobart could be rough. That is part of why they came. Before the start, forecasts warned of strong weather. Offshore racers do not expect calm seas all the way to Hobart. A forecast for hard wind is not automatically a reason to abandon one of the world's great races. Many of the sailors had seen heavy weather before. Some had spent years learning how to handle exactly that kind of situation. And that is one of the unsettling parts of this story. The warning was real. The danger was real. But the scale of what developed at sea was larger than many crews expected. The early hours of the race still felt like racing. The fastest boats pushed ahead. Crews changed sails, checked positions, and tried to make the most of the wind. On deck, everything was movement, lines running through wet hands, winches grinding, sails filling and cracking, spray coming over the bow. Below deck, the race had another rhythm: navigation tables, weather information, radio checks. Crew resting in short shifts, trying to sleep while the boat slammed and rolled around them. Out there, fatigue starts early. A sailor may be awake for a sail change, get soaked, go below, peel off wet gear, try to rest, then be called back up because the wind has shifted. The body never fully relaxes. The sound of the boat becomes part of the nervous system: hull, rigging, water, wind. At first, that is normal. Then, the wind built, and kept building. By the second day, the race was no longer just difficult, it was changing shape. The fleet was spreading out. Some boats were far ahead, others were still working down the coast. The weather was no longer one problem in one place. It was a system large enough to catch different yachts at different moments, damaging one, then another, then another. Storm force winds tore across the water. Seas grew large enough to roll boats, break masts, smash windows, and flood cabins. On some yachts, crews were no longer thinking about their position in the race. They were trying to keep the boat upright long enough to survive the next wave. That is the moment when a race stops being a race. It does not happen all at once. No horn sounds, no official voice announces that the competition is over and survival has begun. It happens in smaller decisions. Take down more sail, clip in, check the bilge, call the position in, look at the mast, look at the next wave, then the first distress. Calls changed everything. One damaged yacht is an emergency. Several damaged yachts spread across a violent sea become something else. Soon, rescue coordinators were dealing with a moving map of trouble. Yachts retiring, yachts disabled, crews injured, boats abandoned, life rafts in the water, helicopters trying to operate in weather that was dangerous even for them. The race had become a search and rescue operation. This is easy to say from shore. It is harder to understand what it means. A helicopter crew heading out over a storm does not get a calm version of the ocean just because they are rescuers. They fly into the same weather that broke the boats. Searchlights hit rain and spray. A life raft can vanish behind a wave. A yacht can be visible 1 second and gone the next, hidden by the height of the sea. From the air, the problem was scale. From the water, the problem was time. How long can a damaged boat stay afloat? How long can injured sailors stay clipped to a deck? How long can a raft survive in seas that are still building? How long before darkness turns an already difficult rescue into a nearly impossible one? Among the boats caught in the storm was Winston Churchill, a wooden yacht with a crew of 9. The name sounds grand, but in that weather, names did not matter much. Wood, fiberglass, carbon fiber, money, experience, confidence, preparation. The storm tested all of it. During the disaster, Winston Churchill was abandoned after it took serious damage and began taking on water. Some of the crew were rescued from one life raft. Another raft drifted for more than a day before rescuers reached it. By then, only 2 of the 5 men in that raft were still alive. John Dean, James Lawler, and Michael Bannister died. Winston Churchill was only one part of the disaster, but it shows how quickly the race had changed. These were not sailors losing a competition. They were people waiting in a life raft in a sea so violent that rescue itself became uncertain. Think about what that means for the people on shore. At the start of the race, families know the boats are heading into difficult water. That is part of the bargain. They also trust the systems around the race, the experience of the crews, the preparation of the boats, the weather information, the radio schedules, the rescue network waiting behind it all. But when the storm hit, families were no longer watching a sporting event. They were waiting for names. They were waiting to hear which boats had been found, which crews were safe, which life rafts had been located, which calls had gone unanswered. Other boats suffered too. Business Post Naiad was hit hard by the storm. Philip Skeggs and Bruce Guy died. Sword of Orion was also caught in the violence of the sea. Glenn Charles died. Across the fleet, the numbers kept getting worse. 5 yachts sank. 6 sailors died. 55 sailors were rescued. 71 boats retired. Only 44 made it to Hobart. Those numbers matter. But numbers can also flatten a disaster. On a race chart, A retired boat is just a status. In the water, it can mean a broken mast, a flooded cabin, injured crew, a life raft, a helicopter searchlight, or a skipper making the hardest decision of the voyage. Do they keep sailing? Do they abandon the boat? Do they wait for rescue? Do they ask someone else to risk their life to reach them? In a storm like this, none of those choices is clean. Keeping a damaged yacht can be dangerous. Abandoning it can be worse. A boat, even broken, may still be easier to see than a raft. It may still offer some protection, but if it is flooding, rolling, or breaking apart, staying aboard can become a death sentence. This is the kind of decision people imagine they would make clearly. At sea, clarity is rare. The boat is moving. The crew is exhausted. Someone may be injured. The radio may be difficult to hear. The deck may be underwater half the time. The skipper has to make a decision with incomplete information in weather that punishes delay. That is why disasters at sea so often become chains. Not one mistake, not one wave, not one warning, a chain. The 1998 Sydney to Hobart disaster was exactly that. A famous race, a dangerous route, a large fleet with boats of very different sizes and capabilities, weather that intensified, warnings that were interpreted in different ways, and a rescue system suddenly facing too many emergencies at once. The rescue effort became massive. Aircraft, helicopters, ships, and rescue crews worked through dangerous conditions to find sailors scattered across the race area. Some crews were lifted from boats. Others were found in rafts. Some waited for hours, not knowing whether the next sound would be a helicopter or just more wind. There's a strange cruelty in rescue at sea. Help may be coming. It may even be close. But close is not the same as reachable. A helicopter can see a raft and still need time to make the approach. A ship can know where a yacht is and still be unable to get alongside without crushing it. A crew can hear rescue traffic and still have no idea whether they are next or whether another boat is in worse trouble. For the sailors, time stretched. For the rescuers, it compressed. Every call mattered. Every position mattered. Every update could change priorities. That is one reason the story is bigger than the storm itself. The weather created the disaster, but the rescue effort shaped how many people lived through it. When the survivors finally reached land, the race was over. But the questions were not. How had the fleet been caught so badly? Were the warnings strong enough? Were they communicated clearly enough? Should the race have been managed differently once the storm worsened? Were the boats prepared for the conditions they actually met, not just the conditions they expected? After the disaster, investigations and reviews examined the race, the weather warnings, the decisions made by race management, and the safety systems in place at the time. Later summaries of the inquest describe criticism of both race management and weather communication. Safety rules changed after 1998, including tighter expectations around experience, equipment, and emergency preparedness. That matters, because offshore racing depends on a difficult balance. If every dangerous forecast canceled every race, there would be very little ocean racing at all. But if confidence becomes habit and habit becomes assumption, then warnings can start to feel ordinary. A hard forecast becomes just another hard forecast. A dangerous route becomes just the route. A race known for rough weather becomes a race where people expect rough weather and launch anyway. That does not mean the sailors were foolish. It means experience can cut both ways. Experience can keep people alive. It can also make danger feel familiar. And familiar danger is still danger. The Sydney to Hobart disaster did not end the race. The event continued in the years after 1998. Boats still leave Sydney. Crews still chase Hobart. The race still carries prestige, risk, and the pull that makes sailors return to hard water even after knowing what hard water can do. But 1998 changed the meaning of preparation. Before the storm, being ready meant having a strong boat, a skilled crew, good equipment, and the confidence to take on one of the hardest races in the world. Afterward, it meant something colder. It meant asking what happens when several boats need rescue at the same time. It meant asking whether every sailor understands not only the forecast, but the worst version of that forecast. It meant asking whether the race is still a race when the fleet is scattered, crews are injured, and the rescue system is being stretched across a violent sea. The sea did not care that it was a race. By the time the storm hit full force, there were no winners out there. Not really. There were only boats that made it through, boats that did not, and families waiting for news from a coast that suddenly felt very far away. One of the difficult things about this story is that the beginning looks so normal. That bright harbor, those crowded decks, the clean white sails, the confidence of people who had prepared, trained, paid, repaired, planned, and believed they were ready. And many of them were ready. That is what makes the disaster harder to dismiss. This was not simply a story about people who knew nothing about the sea. It was a story about people who knew enough to respect it, but still met a version of it that overwhelmed them. For some, the race ended with damage and exhaustion. For others, it ended in a rescue basket, a life raft, or a phone call home. For 6 sailors, it did not end with land at all. The official record can list the figures: 115 starters, 44 finishers, 5 yachts sunk, 55 sailors rescued, 6 dead. But the real shape of the disaster sits between those numbers. It sits in the hours when crews did not know if rescue could reach them. It sits in the decisions to abandon boats that people had trusted with their lives. It sits in the families waiting for news from a race that had become something else entirely. The Sydney to Hobart race continued, but after 1998, no one could look at the start in exactly the same way. Because everyone knew what those boats were sailing toward. Not just Hobart, not just a finish line. They were sailing toward open water, where preparation matters, judgment matters, equipment matters, and sometimes all of it still meets something bigger. 115 boats left Sydney that morning. Only 44 made it to Hobart.